Hi, this is Robert Reiss on the CEO Forum, and we're here today with Ron Shaich. How are you, Ron?
Good, Robert. Good to speak to you today.
And Ron is an iconic entrepreneur, has done what no one else I really know has done. I've interviewed over 750 CEOs. He has taken two great companies and built them, Oban Pan and Panera. But let's look at Panera. Over the past 20 years, it's been the best performing stock in the restaurant business, but it's actually outperformed almost any stock that I know in any business at 26% annualized growth. It's even beat Warren Buffett. And you built an original concept of a restaurant with 100,000 employees, 2,040 restaurants. This is really your baby. What does it mean to you, and why is it different than any other organization out there?
Well, I think because for us, the folks that are running Panera, it's been this extraordinary opportunity to try out a whole range of philosophies and ways of going about doing this. How do you build a company of quality? How do you actually deliver for guests? How do you find a mechanism to involve and equify team members? What does it mean to ultimately build a company of quality, and how do you do that? You know, I didn't start out intending to go into business, Robert. I was actually much more interested. I grew up at a time when many people were political. I started out trying to have an impact on the world. And I had the opportunity in college to help open a nonprofit convenience store. And as a kid who couldn't dance and sing, I discovered business was the most creative thing I had ever been involved in my life. And I loved it. And this government major went into business, opened a little cookie store in Boston. That
actually called that?
Yeah, called the Cookie Jar, right? And I did it because I wanted to create a place I wanted to work in. And that led to a relationship with a company called Oban Pan. We actually merged my one cookie store with 3 Oban Pans. They were $3 million in debt. We created a new company. That is literally this company today. It's taken many forms, but it is the same literal company today. And that company, at that time, was called Oban Pan Co. Inc. One cookie store, 3 French bakery cafes. And over the last now 36 years, it's been 36 years since we formed it. 1991 we took it public. 26 years since we took it public. It's been a series of transformations, and we've continued to transform in an effort to try to build an organization that frankly delivers, and we've continued to be conscious of trying to transform into a future that is only unfolding as time goes on.
And let's look at that original vision. When you came into Oban Pan, you were young.
Yes.
And it was a little bit chaotic, the little business that you came in.
Sure.
What was your vision then? What were the challenges you faced? And how did you work with them to turn around to build such a successful enterprise?
I think this idea that we start off on someday with the original vision and it's an epiphany is actually completely wrong. I think that for my career, I've been continuing to go to work to learn and to take that learning and turn it into something of substance and value. And first and foremost for our guests, then for our associates, and understand that when we do that, we create something called competitive advantage. The desire for guests to walk across the street to visit us. And when we do that, we unlock shareholder value. We create economic value for all constituencies. So I've been learning the entire way. The original vision, to your question back in Oban Pan, was simply to survive. We had a broken down business. I had one store, they had 3 stores, and they were in debt, and $3 million in debt. And our goal was simply to run that business, create a restaurant that I wanted to visit, an establishment I wanted to work in, take care of the good people, get rid of the bad people, get the money to the bank, and see if we could grow it. And quite simply, quick story, by 1984, we had actually gotten off the ground. I paid down the debt. In 1984, I had you'd think it was an epiphany, but a realization. I was listening to guests, and I think that's one of the roles of a CEO, to really have empathy and listen. And I remember a customer walked in and said, "I want that baguette." And I said, "Sure." And they say, "Slice it." I say, "Sure." And I slice it the way you slice bread, like that. They say, no, slice it from top to bottom. I said, okay, I'll do it. And I handed them the bread, and they pulled out a bag from Stop and Shop, and they put turkey on it. And you didn't have to be a brilliant marketeer or Harvard MBA to realize there was an opportunity in sandwiches. And so '84, again, my first big transformation. I essentially said, croissant and bread are not the end. They are simply a platform to sell sandwiches. And it was that understanding that powered Au Bon Pain's success. And Au Bon Pain was the first high-density urban feeder in places like New York, in Boston and Washington, where the choice was fine dining and fast food. It was a forerunner of what they now call fast casual. That fast forwarded us to 1991 when we took the company public. We were rocking a couple of hundred stores. We go public. The next major transformation, that wasn't a big transformative event, it was just a financing. 93 was the next transformation. We were running Au Bon Pain, and again, I try to really think, what's going to happen in the future? What are the implications of what we're doing? What is the byproduct of the intentions that I have? And by '93, it was pretty clear that the very things that have made Au Bon Pain a success limited it. You know, many businesses aren't built for growth, and Au Bon Pain had great success. I had a wonderful partner, a gentleman named Lou King, now deceased, had phenomenal real estate connections. And Au Bon Pain was at his best in New York, Boston, and Washington, D.C., but didn't work in the malls of L.A. or in Middle America. And we made the decision in 1993 to evolve the company, let Au Bon Pain grow at the rate it could, and figure out what our competencies were elsewhere. And that led us to an international business, built a couple hundred stores in Latin America and Asia. It led us to a manufacturing business, built the largest frozen dough facility in the Midwest. And it led me in '93 to buy a company called St. Louis Bread Company. Interesting, many of the most valuable things in my career happened serendipitously. I met a couple of guys from St. Louis who had an 18-store chain. I essentially was asked to help them, guide them on why they don't want to go into franchising. I did. They invited me out. I went to visit, and I was just stunned by what they were doing there. 19 stores doing volumes almost as high as Au Bon Pain, but in strip centers in St. Louis. And I ended up buying the business, we in Au Bon Pain, for $23 million. And Robert, the beautiful part of the story, the guy who I bought it from, a guy named Kenny Rosenthal, he took the money and became our franchisee. He's a very smart man, and maybe valuable for a lot of your listeners. He knew what he was capable of and what he wasn't. And he knew we were better to take this from 25 restaurants up to 500. And he took that money, became our franchisee, and eventually grew a business over decades. His Panera franchise, that was 4 times larger than the business he sold us. And even more beautiful, 26 years later, I still say we love each other, respect each other for sure. And you don't hear that in America, certainly in these kind of deals. Anyway, we bought it in '93. That was the second major transformation. The third was to transform all of this company. And in '95 and '96, I spent much of my time running around the country trying to understand, the role of a CEO, what's the signal versus the noise? What's the wheat versus the chaff? What was going on in our industry? And I concluded there was a powerful phenomenon occurring called decommodification.
Decommodification.
Or a dry perspective. Simply put, when I grew up in the 50s, every product was local. What happened in the 50s and 90s in corporate America was huge consolidations across all these major categories. What it led to is in every consumer category, an oligopoly with just a couple of folks dominating. In beer, it was Anheuser-Busch and Miller with 92% market share. Coke and Pepsi, 90% market share.
And you have about 30 seconds till commercial break.
Got it. And you had Folgers and Maxwell House dominating in coffee. And the reality, Robert, is people reacted to this massing of society where everything was the same, every room one was the same. You saw specialty beer, a good friend of mine in Boston, Jim Cook, specialty coffee, Starbucks. You saw specialty beverages. We began to see the same exact phenomena happening and possible in specialty food, big opportunity, and in specialty baked goods. Simply put, when fast food first emerged, it was the antidote to the greasy spoon. By 1990, they had become self-service gasoline stations for everybody. It was a powerful revelation that ultimately formed something that's now called fast casual.
This is Robert Reiss on the CEO Forum. We're about to take a break. When we come back, we will hear from Ron Shaich about advice to CEOs, how to run your business and elevate it to the next level and be transformative. Back in a few. Hi, this is Robert Reiss on the CEO Forum, where we speak with the CEOs who have reinvented the fabric of America. We're here today with Ron Shaich, who is the CEO of first was Obon Pan and now Panera Bread. And I want to ask you, when you look at your stock performance over the years from April 18th, 1997 to April 24th, 2017, the S&P had 210% growth. Panera Bread had 9,753%.
You might say we beat them by almost 50 to 1, huh?
It's amazing. You invest $1,000, you've $9 million. So what advice do you have? You talked about being transformative to have not just great results, but unprecedented results.
Well, in our case, I think it's been rooted in our willingness to really tell the truth, to really understand what's going to matter tomorrow. In our case, 100,000 employees. The name of the game is how do we figure out how to position this company for tomorrow? And then third, when we commit to something, to actually get it done. It's been at the core of everything we've done. We're intentional by nature. There's nothing we don't examine and we don't look at. And we
I want to interrupt you there. How do you become intentional by nature? Is it you thinking things? How does that happen?
I describe it this way, Robert. And some would say that Panera has been a 36-year-long conversation that never stops. Right? In Panera, we love trying to figure out where is the world going, how do we position into it, and how do we drive competitive advantage within that. And we've had a series of events that have gotten us there. If you really go backwards, the big transformative event was '99. We had, Panera was one of 4 divisions of this company called Obon Pan. I was down in the Caribbean. I'd go through a process generally every Christmas week where I do what I call pre-mortem. My dad passed away. I watched him go through that process. My mom passed away. And I realized as I watched my dad pass away that we all have these opportunities to evaluate our lives. And I realized the time to do it, at least in my case, is when I have a chance to change things, not later. And I go through this every holiday, and I really ask myself a series of questions. How am I doing in relationship to my family, my health, my work, my own God, the things that matter to me? And I do the same thing relative to Panera. And in 1999, I'm on the beach, I'm with a friend, and I'm saying, Panera has the potential to be a nationally dominant brand. For every 100 brands that talk about being nationally dominant, one ever makes it. And it's not one division out of 4 in this big public company. This friend of mine looks at me and she says, Ron, what would you do if Panera owned Obon Pan, not the other way around? And I said, my God. I said, this is the gem and we're going to screw it up. I said, if I had any will, I would sell everything else, monetize everything else, take all the resources we had, take the best people within the organization, go down there myself and make this happen. And I'm the kind of guy that if I think it, and it makes sense to me, I want to go do it. I actually went and did it. And it was the worst year and a half of my life. Many times I wanted to turn back. I hated it. Obon Pan was my first son. And these were people I loved. And fortunately, many of them came back after their non-competes, but sometimes you have to take that hard decision. You have to tell yourself the truth. And in our case, this was where the value was. Sometimes you have to understand what matters, which was unlocking this and giving it the capabilities to live into its future. And then you got to get it done. And we did. 1999, we were free. We had a couple of 100 stores, a bunch of cash, and the rest has been history.
So, but now with the digital world, how do you prepare? Now you have this phenomenal thing where you go there and you just sign up while you're waiting online, but how are you really thinking today about the future and the digital revolution
I'll
that's
step
coming?
you back and tell you another little story. So 2009, great run, I actually stepped it back from Panera, became executive chairman. And I wanted to apply a lot of what I learned about building companies with a long-term commitment to our political environment. Helped form a group called No Labels, which is trying to reduce the hyper-partisanship in DC. I ended up creating Panera cafes, we call them Panera Care, where there were no set prices. I wanted to see if that would work. It did. We served at one point 1 million people in these cafes with no set prices in a donation bin. Found it fascinating to do. Got to the nature of humanity. At any rate, I was basically out about a year, still doing all of the customer-facing stuff. And I wrote a memo one week on how I would compete with Panera if I weren't part of Panera. The guy who had taken over from me asked me if I'd work on it. I did. I brought that vision to life, and a year after I'd stepped down, I'm working at Panera 80 hours a week. And I loved it, and I was doing the doing of it. And I was actually still there, and Bill, who had taken it over from me, he began to have some issues in his own life. He couldn't travel. And one thing led to another. He felt out of integrity. He asked me to become CEO again. He became executive vice chairman. I came back. And that led to another transformation plan, really rooted around how does Panera compete? How is it truly a better competitive alternative? How's it driving desire, and how's it reducing friction? Where's Panera going to grow? How does it grow from 5 to 10 billion? What capabilities does it need to have in place now to get that done? And how does it provide air cover in a large public company to get that kind of transformation done? And then we wrote initiatives for each of those ends. Relative to the issue of being a better competitive alternative, it meant something we called Panera 2.0, which was digital access, and then adjusting the production systems to adjust to it. It meant really ripping up our innovation structure in food, marketing, and ops. It meant moving into new channels. We started in eat-in, we moved into to-go with something called rapid pickup. We then took it from there into large order delivery, and then now small order delivery. It also allowed us to go into CPG. It meant that we had to build what had been a modest IT function into what is now perceived as one of the top 1, 2, or 3 digital operations in the country. And then finally, along the way, we had to figure out how to pay the bills and keep the credibility of everybody, of all of our stakeholders as we went through this process. The point I'm simply trying to make is, for us, what leadership amounts to is actually understanding where you stand, where the future's going. To learn that, we do that with empathy. To do that, we try to walk in other people's moccasins. The reality is the future is here, it's just inequitably distributed. We have to see it and understand it. And once we do that, we have to figure out what our end is in mind. And then we've got to really understand how that's going to get accomplished and get it done. It's not complicated, it's just really hard to do.
And on that note, it is a pleasure having you on the CEO Forum.
Thank you, Robert. Great. Hope you got what you needed.
We did. This was great. By the way, really funny thing. When you said, really my first son,
I know.
all of a sudden, Michael looked up like that. When you were saying, oh, about Pan, my first son, he's like, no, what about me?
He's heard that.
But wait.